Episode of the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I am Anthony Cosenza, and I am joined by my co-host, John Sheeran. John, I think we've got this whole thing figured out. We've been able to find a new platform, so to speak, to keep the live show. Now we get to see you. We get to hear you in better quality. And, of course, Randall makes his glorious re-debut on the show. How are you, buddy?
Yeah, my good buddy Randall back there behind me. He was about to move out to LA so we can get some camera time with you if I wasn't going to be on here in the near future. So this is great, man. We have StreamYard.com is our now streaming service for the moment, and so far so good for us on my end.
Yeah, so StreamYard.com is what we're using, and it should be, at least to my knowledge, directly feeding to our YouTube channel. It looks like it is. We're thankful for that. And I have to thank a guest that's coming onto the show that introduced me to StreamYard, Brandan Schulze, who is with Field Gulls, the SB Nation Seattle Seahawks website. He's going to help us preview week one with the Bengals and the Seahawks. So we'll get a look over the other side of the fence and talk about some things with him. He'll be joining us about halfway through the episode tonight. So excited to have him and grateful that he kind of mentioned this thing, and hopefully this ends up working well. So at any rate, John, look, man, the season's here. It's been a big weekend for news. Labor Day weekend it's supposed to be relaxing, but for some of us who have to track news, it's really not. Anyway, I guess let's kind of dive right into the 53-man roster. The Bengals had it set. There were a couple of surprises. Then a day later, when they scoured the waiver wire, they made a couple of additions, let go of a couple of guys. Let's look at it kind of holistically. What were your impressions of the 53-man roster?
Yeah, when the first moves started coming out, like I was waiting for something for me to scratch my head about, and honestly, like for the most part, I was very pleased with everything that they did. I think we pretty much guessed for the most part how many at each position they were going to keep, with the exception of maybe going 11 on defensive line instead of maybe 10. 4 linebackers is a little bit lower than what we expected at about 5. And I think they were a little light at cornerback too compared to most conventional wisdom. But starting with the receivers, the decision to let go of not only Cody Core but also Josh Malone was shocking, but very pleasant on my end. For them to be able to keep both Auden Tate and Damian Willis is definitely a good move on their part. And they originally kept Josh Malone, and then they cut him for another guy in Pharaoh Cooper, who they picked up on waivers. So that, I think, was a sense of Zach Taylor wanting to get his own guys into the system, specifically at a position that he has a history of coaching. And on the offensive line, the only big real shock to me was them keeping O'Shea Dugas, but it turns out they were going to keep him just so they can place him on injured reserve for the off chance that he might come back later in the season. So initially I was displeased about keeping Dugas because there was no way that a guy of his talent was worthy of a roster spot, even for an offensive line that's as awful as the Bengals. But their decision-making process kind of redeemed themselves a bit by the move they made, and they ended up re-signing John Jerry to replace him when he went to IR. And on the defensive side, like, the defensive line is their strength, and if they want to maximize on this strength, all the more power to them. It's going to be interesting to see how many of those 11 guys are active for week one and for the rest of the season, and if they're going to run into issues only keeping 4 linebackers. And, they have 2 on the practice squad. And unfortunately, one of them is Hardy Nickerson, but that was another surprising cut, I think, because last year, the last couple of years, Nickerson has made the team, despite not being a very good athlete and just not being very good at football in general, besides the occasional special teams flashes. But I think he's like the perfect practice squad player, and I think that the new coaching staff realizes that. So a lot of things different now that Marvin Lewis isn't the one making these decisions, and this roster is offensive heavy. There's 26 guys on the active roster on offense compared to 24 on the defense. Most of the practice squad is offensive players as well. So definitely seeing the Zach Taylor influence really pop up in this first year of building this roster.
Surprised about Jake Dolegala?
Initially I kind of was, but then I realized that, if you have the opportunity to keep not 1, but 2 young, promising backup quarterbacks, you definitely have to do it just because of the value of the position. And I definitely think that Dolegala's week 4 performance against the Colts really influenced that. And, maybe he makes it through waivers and then gives stash on the practice squad. I don't think that if Dolegala got on the practice squad, he would have been elevated to anybody else's active roster, which is what would have had to happen for them to lose him. But just the display of confidence and just keeping Dolagala on there, keeping 3 quarterbacks, I think is very promising to him. And honestly, he has the traits worthy of further investment in him for the next couple of years. And I'm excited to see if he ever gets the opportunity, what he does with it.
There are a lot of to me, this roster screams Zach Taylor's thumbprint. I mean, on a lot of
Exactly.
it, and I think that's good. And if you look at kind of, I think you made a couple of comments via Twitter, and some other Bengals talking heads made some comments on Twitter about the moves that they made, getting rid of some of these guys, kind of shedding dead weight a little bit. I think that showed a lot. You mentioned they went heavy at wide receiver. Obviously, that's going to be a point of emphasis. They went initially light at running back, but then they went heavier at running back. We'll talk more about that position in just a little bit because there was some big news there. Heavy on defensive line. I liked kind of the construction of what they had, and I like how you put it, where they found their areas of strength and they weren't afraid to go heavy at those areas. The offensive line is weak, so I mean it's scary, but you know what? They have other areas that are stronger, and they don't want to lose some of those guys that are good players that can still contribute for them, as opposed to carrying some guys that are lesser talent on the offensive line and really not being able to contribute at as much of a high level. So, to me, that makes a lot of sense. I want to ask you about this because the Bengals made 2 waiver claims. We figured, and that's pretty splashy, especially for a team that does not really like to get a lot of outside players. But in itself, the two players were pretty splashy in who they got: Samaje Perine, the running back, and Pharoh Cooper, the wide receiver kick returner. Let's start with Perine. I think that was a little bit more of a popular pick, a more sensical, logical pickup by the Bengals. Your thoughts on Perine and the fact that he's kind of a bigger back, and the fact that Travion Williams is nursing an injury, Rodney Anderson on IR. I think the move makes sense personally.
It makes a lot of sense. And just for starters, we're talking about the differences between Taylor and Marvin Lewis. But the thing with Marvin Lewis is that he always typically had 4 running backs, and his starter was always around, the bigger back size, 220 pounds or so. And he always had a backup of that size to replace him in case he went down. And this is the case this year again. You have Joe Mixon leading the way at his size, and you have Giovanni Bernard, Travion Williams, similar sizes to them, a little under 5'10", about 200 pounds. And then Perine's is the big back replacement, right? He's I think a little bit bigger than what Mixon was, but those two guys have a history with each other. And when thinking about potential waiver claims at running back, offensive line, linebacker, Perine was the first guy that really popped in my head as a guy that they can go out and get because of the history that Mixon and Perine shared. They both played at Oklahoma. Perine actually is the all-time leading rusher at Oklahoma. When Mixon was suspended for a whole season, Perine got the lion's share of the carries, if you will. And then for their last year together, they both kind of split the duties there. But Perine is kind of like more of the power back, more the quote unquote short yardage back. You can do less with him compared to a guy like Mixon, who's definitely more of an electric runner. But I like the move from that sense. It builds chemistry in that running back group. Now you have 3 guys on the roster in total who are from Oklahoma. You might as well just pencil in any future Oklahoma running back going to the Cincinnati Bengals from this point forward. But I definitely like the Perine move for what it is. Unfortunately, again, he's just a limited running back. He's not that much of a pass catcher, definitely not that much of a pass blocker, and he's just not the athlete that Mixon is. But fortunately, you don't have to rely on him until you absolutely need to, because he'll be 4th on the depth chart. So for a guy that just rounds out the group and a guy that just had no chance of making it in Washington, who has a plethora of running backs on their own, it makes a lot of sense. And it was definitely the better of the 2 waiver claims, in my opinion, that they made.
Yeah, and short yardage guy probably, right? Maybe some goal line formations, that sort of thing. Kind of a little bit of a bowling ball type of guy, one cut guy and go. I like what you mentioned about the Oklahoma facet, because I think that the system that Jim Turner wants to run on the offensive line, the running game, that's why they brought in a guy he's familiar with Travion Williams, and they brought in Keaton Sutherland as an undrafted free agent. He's now on the practice squad. I think it's just a schematic thing, and that's where Perine kind of fits into the mold there, what they want to do in terms of the running game, the schemes, the blocking schemes, backs that know what's going on. That's why they have 2 Oklahoma backs. Joe Mixon recently said to some of the Cincinnati media that a lot of the concepts that Zach Taylor is running this year is a lot of stuff that Lincoln Riley does in Oklahoma. And so I think it obviously, again, Taylor playing to player strengths, playing to the roster strengths. You got to like that. Now, the Bengals picked up a second guy. And obviously a lot of people are kind of scratching their heads on this one. I personally think I liked it more than most people, and I have a reason why. I'll get to that. But Pharoh Cooper was a guy, he's kind of bounced around the league over the past couple of years, was drafted in the 4th round of the 2016 draft by the Rams. So obviously there's the Taylor connection there. Really, his main impact has been as a return man. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, because you're a little bit more sour on the move probably than I am, which is totally understandable. But it seems, is most of that frustration or most of that feeling to it, is that because you had wished that the team did more on offensive line or linebacker instead of kick returner, or you don't like the player, or both?
It's more of, I think, a confusion of where they're going in terms of direction-wise, because Cooper was a guy who played a total of like 6 offensive snaps last season for the Rams. And he was mainly just a kick returner. And he didn't play that much of special teams outside of return duties. So you're thinking to yourself, okay, with AJ Green out of the roster, they're going to have probably 5 or 6 active receivers. So maybe one guy besides Green is going to be inactive when he's out. And you're thinking, okay, Josh Malone was going to be that guy because he didn't provide much on special teams. And then you could roll with Auden Tate and Alex Erickson as your reserves. With Cooper in the equation, does this mean that Auden Tate is going to be sidelined, or he's not going to dress for those games, and they're going to have Cooper do the special teams duties? He's not really a special teams guy, but aside from returning, and they already have, in my opinion, 2 returners who can handle most of the duties, in Alex Erickson and Darius Phillips. Cooper wasn't even officially listed as a return man on the first official depth chart that was released today, and he's listed as John Ross's backup as the flanker wide receiver. So, and he's mainly played in the slot in his career. And honestly, he's a receiver that doesn't really do a good job of receiving. So it's almost like, the reason why we were sour on Cody Core was because he wasn't a bad special teams player, and that's what he was known for. But he played a lot of offense and just did not produce very well, and just wasn't very good as a receiver. And it's more or less the same that we're getting with Cooper. He's just an underwhelming receiver in that aspect. And the thing that he does well at as far as returning kicks and whatnot, they already have 2 guys who I have confidence in doing that. So it just seems like they added him for the sake of adding guys who know the system, and that's all fine and whatnot. But I wish they prioritize, like you said, going more towards the offensive line, be more active in terms of claiming guys there, and instead of going for a guy who doesn't really push the needle for a position group that was already pretty much a strength. That's
really my only big complaint about it, is the fact that you really didn't use the opportunity to bolster areas of weak spots necessarily. I mean, even running back, you could kind of say, well, I mean, if Travion Williams is going to be healthy for week 1, they've got 3 guys who are either very talented to relatively talented that could help out. So these may have been looked at as a little bit more of luxury type of pickups. But my thing that I liked about it is it plays into, a lot of people are saying, oh, Alex Erickson's gone. Alex Erickson's going to be cut because Pharoh Cooper's coming in. And I was saying, I think it's the opposite. I think that means that Erickson is going to get an uptick in play on offense. He's probably going to be a slot guy, and he's probably going to be relied on pretty heavily in these first couple of weeks with AJ Green out. And you have an undrafted free agent, Damian Willis, taking snaps, as a starter. So they're going to need veteran presence at the wide receiver position. So to me, I think it's like, and if you noticed in the preseason, Alex Erickson wasn't playing all that much.
Right.
And Taylor didn't play a lot of guys in the preseason that we all assume are going to have high profile roles in the offense. So to me, I think that's where I like this move, where it kind of gives if they like what they see on offense from Alex Erickson, it gives the team the opportunity to use him in that capacity.
Yeah, I just wish that it was just a more talented player, in my opinion. And again, if your saving grace is being a return man, then that's fine. There's value in that. It's just not, I think, the value that they should have went after. But at the end of the day, he's the 6th, 7th receiver on the roster. He's not going to make an impact unless he absolutely has to. And at that point, the Bengals are already pretty much in trouble. And there's not a receiver on the market, maybe 1 or 2 guys who could really save them from any catastrophic events that might occur in the coming weeks.
Yep. And who knows what's going to happen when some of these guys come back healthy. Darquez Dennard, who is on the PUP list, AJ Green, whenever that might be, 1 week, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, who knows? Who knows if Cooper's going to even really remain on the roster once Green is back. We'll see. But at least for now, I think it did show it was a little bit of a luxury item, I guess, if you want to call it that. But it was also, something where, I think it kind of plays, once again, is allowing the team to use the strength or mask a deficiency with a player who's injured out of the lineup. But overall, I think, for what the Bengals had on the roster, I think it looks pretty good. I think, like we said, Zach Taylor put his thumbprint on this roster, and I still think it's a little fluid. Do you?
Oh, for sure. And we just saw some recent fluidity news with that, because they actually worked out, I think, 7 guys today, most of them being offensive linemen or linebackers. So again, 11 defensive linemen, 4 linebackers. I don't expect those numbers to be the same a couple weeks down the road, or maybe even before this week is over.
Yep. So the Bengals have their final roster set. They have their practice squad set. And a couple of familiar faces there: Keaton Sutherland, you mentioned, Hardy Nickerson, the Ellis kid, the running back wasn't one. Moritz Boehringer. I mean, a lot of familiar faces on that. So I think they did a good job of keeping who they needed to keep and working on that there. Kind of segueing a little bit into news and notes, you mentioned that the Bengals worked out some players on Tuesday afternoon. They also did some work behind the scenes, behind the curtain, if you will, and they extended Giovanni Bernard to a 2-year deal, basically keeping him here for I believe it's the next 3 years. It's kind of tacking 2 on to the final year of his deal that he has right now. So he's going to be in Cincinnati through 2021. Kind of a lucrative deal. There are pluses and minuses to this one, John. I really like the guy. I like the player. I worry about, I like the outlook of him producing in a Zach Taylor offense. I don't know about paying a third contract to a running back. I don't know about giving him an average of $6 million a year for a guy that's your 1B or 2A running back. Your thoughts just kind of on the Bernard extension, if the Bengals, made a smart move, a risky move, or somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, nothing really gets football Twitter more riled up than the discussions regarding a second contract for running backs. So when a running back gets a third contract, it should be quite a bit of news. But in all honesty, like this new money that he got puts him just about the same as where he was before this. Below a lot of other marquee running backs, puts him right along with Ravens running back Mark Ingram in terms of average money. And like the first thing that I really thought of when I heard about this is that, okay, I like Gio, but do I really want to give more money to a running back who's going to be 30 quicker than we imagined? But I also realized that the extension that he signed back in 2016 after playing 3 years, it was worth about $5.5 million per year, and that was when the salary cap was about $155 million. Salary cap is now $190 million. He's making about the same money. So relative to what the cap is, this is honestly deflating his contract and his average salary compared to just how much the cap has grown. So in reality, he didn't get a raise and didn't get the same money. He actually got less money relative to how much money that they can give out. And that makes a lot of sense because over the past 3 years, they've used Bernard about 10%, 20% less than they did in his first 3 years. I think he's had 40% of his total touches, about 30-something% of his total yards has come in the past 3 years, and that's splitting his career in half. So they really used him a lot more in those first 3 years, paid him $5.5 million, used him less, paid him about $5 million per year this year. So it's all relative and it matches pretty perfectly to what his usage has been. And it's almost like they just got like a discount because they just underutilized him. And that's always been the one thing that has bothered us about Bernard in the Bengals offense past 3 years, is the fact that he just hasn't been used properly and hasn't been used enough, and he's more talented than what his volume stats represent. So if this is a sign that they're going to use him more in the offense, or that he's just going to be more of a focal point and not be phased out of the game, even when you still have Joe Mixon, I'm all for that because he's still talented and he's still relatively fresh compared to what other running backs are at 27 years old. But at the same time, it's still a decent amount of money given to a running back who's not in his early 20s anymore. And also, there has been a little bit of change in how he moves and how explosive and elusive he is coming off that ACL injury a couple years ago. So there is an equal amount of pros and cons, but at the same time, I'm not too blown away because I realize that this isn't exactly a raise or even giving the same amount of money compared to what the salary cap is. And he's still relatively fresh compared to how old he is.
Yeah, that's where this, when you say third contract, well, this isn't third contract to a guy who has the volume of carries of an Adrian Peterson or touches. This is a guy who has been a rotational back, a guy who really doesn't have the wear on the tires, if you want to use a terrible analogy. So in that sense, it makes sense. The numbers for a player that is kind of a rotational guy, that's where I'm like, I don't know. He is still only 27 at this time. I mean, he's not really, it's not like he's just going to turn 30 this year or something like that. So he's still young. Right. So that also kind of plays into their favor. I really like the player, not only from a personality standpoint. He seems to be very well liked on that team, but he does a lot of things that I don't think a lot of casual Bengals fans may notice. I see him pass protect pretty well for a guy his size. I see him run between the tackles, not overly often. I mean, there are times he bounces outside, but when he is tasked with taking the load of the carries, Joe Mixon missed 2 games last year. You see him, for a smaller guy, take carries up the middle with somewhat high frequency. And, he's a guy who, you kind of thought he might be a niche back in the NFL when he was drafted. He kind of is that, but he does a lot of things well. And I think that is where this move makes sense. But the one thing that I think we need to also kind of pause at is the potential of other contracts. Does this hinder that? Right. AJ Green, of course, that discussion took a turn this summer, a different turn this summer based on his ankle injury and him going to be missing a game, if not more. There's that issue. And then the Bengals, a lot of times they don't like to open up the pocketbook too much. They do like to open it up for their own guys, especially skill position offensive players, but they don't like to open it up as much as some other teams. And of course, you look at the outside signing factors, in-season veterans, that sort of thing. Do you see that affecting either of those scenarios?
Right. They're still at this point not, stricken with cap space, and they still have plenty of amount to give to AJ Green. If that's going to happen, it's going to happen in the next couple of days before they take off to Seattle. And if AJ was healthy for this preseason, I would guarantee that would happen. At this point, I don't know, but a positive that can be taken away from this, and a positive from my perspective and what most people's perspective should be, is that if they're still paying Bernard $5.5 million for the next 2 years, Joe Mixon's free agency will be coming up after 2 years, and Bernard will still be under contract by the time that Mixon becomes a free agent. And if they continue to use Gio and take away Mixon's touches to really make Mixon that premier, starting running back, there's a very high possibility now that Mixon pretty much is done after 2019 or 2020, whatever his final year is, or 2020. And that's honestly good, because at that point, the market for running backs could reach pretty close to 20 million. And at that point, running back value won't increase any more than what it is now. So that's a conversation that we're going to have in 18 months or so, whenever his free agency really pops up. And if they're still paying Bernard that money and they still have guys like Rodney Anderson, Travion Williams under contract, I think this sets them up for potentially putting themselves in a better position for life after Joe Mixon, because, based off the type of person that Mixon is, he's not going to want to have anything less than what he's worth on the open market. And maybe some team will give him that, but I really don't think it will be the Bengals if they keep Bernard under the books for this long.
Yeah, it is an interesting time, interesting landscape in the NFL, really, over the past 2 seasons for the running back position. Le'Veon Bell, of course, setting out all of 2018. You have Melvin Gordon threatening to sit out. You have Ezekiel Elliott threatening to sit out this year. So, a very, very interesting market. And if that kind of holds, who knows what's going to happen with Joe Mixon if his career continues to take off after leading the AFC in rushing yards last year. I think smart move in a lot of respects for the Bengals in extending Giovanni Bernard. It's not something that absolutely breaks the bank or anything, but you keep a good player, a guy that you want to you want to hang on to. I just hope that it doesn't handicap them in keeping other players that they want, as well as, I hope that this means they will use him in a more effective way. I would like to see formations out there with both Mixon and Giovanni Bernard out there, whether that's both in the backfield or Gio maybe taking some receiver snaps out of the slot or something like that, especially when Green is out of the lineup. He is a weapon there too. So, but for now, the Bengals worked out a handful of players on Tuesday afternoon, and they signed Giovanni Bernard to a 2-year extension, keeping him in Cincinnati through 2021. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. He's John Sheeran. I'm Anthony Cosenza. We're going to be joined by Brandan Schulze in just a minute of the Field Gulls podcast. We're going to talk about week 1 with him, get some insight on the Seattle Seahawks, not an opponent that the Bengals get to see very often. So, and by the way, if anyone is wondering, I am going to be going to that game this weekend. So if any of you are out there and you want to try and meet up, I'd love to maybe meet up, say hey, and hang out with you all if we're able. So had a couple of questions about that, and got that finalized. So looking forward to that. But at any rate, this is, as I mentioned, the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. You can get this show on iTunes, on Stitcher, on Spotify, on Google Play. You can get it on the Megaphone platform. YouTube, we've got the YouTube channel, the live streaming back up and running, so we're excited about that. And, of course, you could get it on cincyjungle.com and download it there.
Are you a frequent visitor of the Pacific Northwest? Because I've never been.
I am not. I've only actually been once. It was 2 years ago I went. It was still around the same time of year. It was September. So it was pretty nice. It seems like it's actually going to be relatively warm up there for it being Seattle this weekend. Its highs are low to mid 70s, so that's pretty warm for up there. So I'm looking forward to it. I just hope the end result is not something that makes me wonder why I paid that money to go up there. But
I think as long as it doesn't rain, you'll be fine. Because I just imagine there's always a perpetual rain cloud over.
Yeah, I don't think that's. Luckily, I don't think that's. That's not in the forecast. I don't believe so. It should be pretty mellow. Now, unfortunately, the Bengals do not seem to travel very well, and especially when they go out west, I should say. They don't seem to travel very well. So we'll see we'll see how that works out. But joining us now, I believe we have at least audio. I don't think we have video, but we have Brandan Schulze from Field Gulls, the SB Nation's Seattle Seahawks site. Brandan, are you there?
I am here. What's up, guys?
Hey, what's going on, man? Thanks for making the time.
Absolutely. Always excited to talk about football, especially going into week 1 of the regular season. Fired up.
Yeah, awesome. And hey, before we get into any of the questions, I said this at the onset of the show. You telling us about StreamYard has been an absolute godsend, my friend. I got to tell you, I don't know if you ever did anything on YouTube or Google Hangouts or anything like that. That's been our staple for like 3 years on this show. We had it dialed in, and we've got our live listeners that like to tune in and submit questions and comments and all that kind of stuff. Well, YouTube and changed their platform as of August 1st. So the last month, really, we've been trying to scramble to make this work, and the audio quality wasn't there. So thank you for putting this bug in my ear. I looked at it right away when I saw your email, and I was like, oh my gosh, we got to check this out. So
this is it.
It seems to be working well. So you are a hero for this week, at least. So I appreciate you putting the idea in my head, Brandon.
Now, if you can put it in the head of your head coach to spot the Seahawks about 14 points in this home opener, it would just be ideal. You would totally pay me back for the suggestion.
Well, according to a lot of talking heads, the Seahawks may not need to be spotted 14 points. It seems as if the Bengals are a massive underdog. Look, I guess I'll kind of start here with kind of a big picture question for you. This is a little bit, at least from those of us who don't get to see Seahawks games, I guess, regularly. This is a much different looking Seahawks team, both from an injury standpoint and from, a lot of the Legion of Boom guys being gone and all of that. How is the confidence level in this year's team with some of those big name guys being either shown the door or being injured coming into this week?
Well, if you think back to just how much has changed over the years, I would say that really compared to last season, the one guy that you're missing from the roster that was there week 1 in 2018 was Earl Thomas. And he was lost after, I think, the week 4 game last year. So nothing much has really changed apart from Frank Clark on the defensive line, but, years out of losing Michael Bennett, Cliff Averill, there's just been a lot of turnover on the defensive line as well. So really, and going back to, the last time the Seahawks played the Bengals, really the only guys are probably the couple guys that are there from the Super Bowl roster with Russell Wilson, Bobby Wagner, and KJ Wright. So it's definitely a different sort of team than Bengals fans may have seen last time, but those are 3 top players that I think Seahawks fans are very confident about. As long as Russell Wilson is healthy for the full season, I think we feel pretty good about the chances of our team.
It's not often, this is John Sheeran, by the way, it's not often that NFL teams commit just strong arm robbery, but how's it feel to be on the good end of receiving Jadeveon Clowney for the exchange of, I can't even name the players because I don't think they're that important.
Yeah, a 3rd round pick and essentially 2 backup defensive linemen. We were pretty excited about Jacob Martin as a potential prospect, as excited as you can be, I think, because he was a 6th round pick, so you're not expecting a whole lot. But his pass rush productivity numbers were really high. So he was kind of a guy we were going to be leaning on with the departure of Frank Clark to pressure the quarterback a lot more. And it seems when you go from a name like Jacob Martin to Jadeveon Clowney, the uncertainty level goes way, way down as far as that pass rush productivity factor. So definitely excited about the move. I don't exactly know what the Texans were thinking, especially when we found out that not only did we get him for a steal in terms of draft picks, but they had to pay $7 million of his salary. That was pretty incredible.
So, Brandon, I live in Southern California, and I follow a lot of USC Trojans football. So obviously I really like Pete Carroll. I have always liked Pete Carroll, even despite some of the, I guess you want to call it, controversy that he kind of left in the wake of his departure from the Trojans, but always been a big fan. I'm looking, obviously I'm not a big time Seahawks fan, but I definitely have followed him. I'm looking at, the records here, double-digit wins almost every single season, only 2 seasons of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, so 7 of 9 seasons he's made the postseason. He's been to 2 Super Bowls and won 1. Is this, for those of us who follow the Bengals and had a coach here for 16 years, is this basically a scenario that, because this could be a double-edged sword, is this a scenario that Carroll has the job is absolutely as long as he wants it based on his resume? Or is this a scenario where, they've been pretty good now these past couple of years. They were good. They won the Super Bowl a couple of years ago. The pressure's even higher now. How do you see that kind of relationship with Carroll and the Seahawks right now?
I'd say it's about as good as it can be for any head coach in the league. As long as you're winning and going to the playoffs, your job feels pretty secure. And especially when you're winning playoff games. And they did miss out on that last year and losing in the first round to the Cowboys. But it has been, you mentioned the consistency. They missed the playoffs one time, and that was with Tavares Jackson as their quarterback. And then they just missed the playoffs 2 years ago. And that was a season where we had Blair Walsh as our field goal kicker. So there were a couple games where he missed some significant kicks that had he made those, and they could have played better. And you can't put all of the blame on Blair Walsh. If I'm a Minnesota Vikings fan, I can put all the blame on him for losing that playoff game and winning the Seahawks a playoff game. So he has won the Seahawks a playoff game, but then we followed that up by screwing it up and signing him to our team, and we missed the playoffs because of it. So I think the main thing, though, is that, Pete Carroll, in the minds of Seahawks fans, definitely a solid head coach. And, with him being one of the, if not the oldest coach in the NFL right now, I think he has this job until he decides that he's done. But you listen to the guy, and he doesn't sound like he's slowing down at all.
No.
Yeah, he's the oldest, but he might be the most fun, which is always what I've been most liked about him. But so we got Pete Carroll, and we also have Russell Wilson, and in my opinion, Wilson has probably done the most with the least amount of talent around him, aside from like a couple years of Marshawn Lynch. But now everyone's talking about Wilson doesn't have any receivers. All he has is Tyler Lockett. DK Metcalf just came back from practice. In your opinion, at least to start the season, how confident are you in the talent level around Russell Wilson in terms of pass catchers and that offensive line in front of him? Because he's always had to make a lot by himself and has always had to do a lot of things and really just carry the offense in itself. And I don't think that the scheme and the overall structure of the offense has changed that much under Brian Schottenheimer. So how confident are you in these receivers around him with the loss of Doug Baldwin going forward under this offense?
Well, I think you can make up for that loss of Doug Baldwin by having Tyler Lockett now as your number one wide receiver. And he's going to be the guy. And they do have some other pass catchers. You mentioned DK Metcalf. We saw the roster, the depth chart came out today, and they actually have Metcalf listed as a starter. So for him to show enough just in a short period of time that he was in before getting injured, it's saying a lot about him going into week one. Now, Jerron Brown was a guy who I thought, they had talked him up quite a bit in the offseason as being that number two guy. They have a lot of rookies at wide receiver. And so I feel like with Metcalf, with Gary Jennings, with John Ursua, who was their 7th round pick, all three of those guys were receivers that they drafted. It's kind of the one big concern, I think. But when you have a veteran quarterback behind center, and you mentioned the offensive line, this might be the best offensive line that Russell has played with since his first and second year with the team. So it's finally getting to that point where you have some protection for Russell Wilson. You have a running back in Chris Carson, who we're excited about. The offense really, the weird thing for Seahawks fans is that we've been so fired up about our defense over past seasons. This might be the best offense that the Seahawks have had over the years. And it feels weird saying that with Brian Schottenheimer as our offensive coordinator, but he showed enough to, be top 6 in the league at scoring points last year. And that's what I feel is one of the most important things.
So you mentioned Chris Carson. Again, I mentioned I'm a Southern California guy, so I know quite a bit about Rashad Penny. He was a guy I thought was a very talented guy coming out of the draft, very versatile player. He has not lived up to the hype. He is kind of in a rotational role, a backup role to Carson. How do you see the distribution playing out, especially against the Bengals? And is this because of some of the issues at wide receiver that you're talking about, or the perceived issues with injuries and all of that? Is that where they're going to try and rely on, is that where they're going to really feed the ball this week to those two running backs, given that the Bengals struggled against the run as a defensive unit last year?
Whether the Bengals struggled as a defensive unit against the run or not, I feel like this team is going to come out and run the ball. They've said that's what they're going to do. That's what they did a lot of last year. And that was really to their detriment in the playoff game against the Cowboys, because they came out and they pounded the ball. They ran into the Cowboys defensive line, which was a brick wall, and they just kept doing it. And as fans, we're sitting here going, geez, throw the ball downfield. It's open. They are trying. You can tell that the defense is just trying to stop the run. They know that's what you want to do. And they waited too long before they went to the air against the Cowboys. So I think they're gonna keep that up in week 1 of the season. One of the downsides of last season is they really waited until weeks 3 and 4 before they started to run the ball effectively last year. And so I expect now that Schottenheimer and Russell are established and going into year 2, that they know what they're going to want to do week 1, and you're going to see a lot of Chris Carson. But I also know that they probably don't want to go above 16 to 18 carries with Carson. And so they're going to mix in Rashad Penny. They'll mix in potentially CJ Prosise, who looked really good inside the preseason, but hasn't been able to stay healthy for a regular season game. So we'll see those two guys get some carries as well. And then you're going to see deep shots to Tyler Lockett, to DK Metcalf, and whoever's open, downfield.
Yeah, that game was just frustrating to watch just from a casual fan's perspective. I can only imagine what it was like for you.
Oh my
But
gosh.
oh yeah, like seriously, just throw the ball. Yeah, Russell Wilson. But everyone knows who Wilson is. Everyone knows who Chris Carson is now. For Bengals fans though, who is one guy on the Seahawks that you expect not necessarily have a big game, but a guy who is flying under the radar? It may not be someone that a lot of other NFL fans know of, and who's a guy who you think is going to really take the next step for you guys in 2019?
Well, I'll give you one guy on either side of the ball. And on the offensive side of the ball, one guy who didn't make a big impact in terms of the rest of the NFL to where they would know him is their tight end, Will Dissly, who was tight end out of University of Washington. He only played 4 games. He had a patellar tendon injury. But up until that injury, he was a really solid. He was looking really good as a rookie tight end. And whether he was just blocking and helping out against that pass rush, or he would sneak down the seam and catch big passes. There was at least a game or two where he had over 100 yards just on a handful of catches. And so that's kind of one sneaky guy that could end up having a good game, being back from injury, and a guy that they played pretty lightly in the preseason, not wanting him to get re-injured with that knee. So expecting some things out of him. And then on the secondary, Bradley McDougald has been a guy who was picked up from the Tampa Bay Bucks, and he's been kind of our he finished tied with Earl Thomas for interceptions at the end of the season last season. Earl Thomas only played 4 games, but Bradley McDougald is that senior member of that secondary now. And he's kind of, whether he can play free safety, he can play strong safety, and he's kind of the guy who ends up being in the neighborhood when maybe you don't expect him to be for potential turnovers.
Talking with Brandan Schulze of Field Goals, the SB Nation Seattle Seahawks site. He'll be with us for just a couple more minutes here as we preview Week 1. The Bengals travel to Seattle to take on the Seahawks in a very daunting first game of the season for the Bengals. Brandan, if you were to, and maybe, obviously I wouldn't expect you to have an intimate knowledge necessarily of the Bengals roster, but if you were to look at this game and say, this aspect of the Bengals team worries me as it goes with a specific matchup on the Seahawks team.
I would go with the Bengals running game because you have Joe Mixon. The Seahawks, they spent some time in the offseason really trying to shore up that defensive line because they got beat a lot last year in the run game. And they went in, they brought Al Woods from the Colts. They elevated Poona Ford to the starting team, but Jaron Reed's out on suspension for the first 6 games. And so there's kind of your Pro Bowl level interior defender that the Seahawks aren't going to have. And you guys, I saw you picked up Samaje Perine off of waivers. I liked him, and I could see the Bengals going heavy dosage of run, especially being on the road. And if the Seahawks can't stop it, if they haven't got those run issues fixed, we saw it against the starting team for the Denver Broncos in Week 1 of the preseason with Phillip Lindsay. He just ran right down the field on their very first drive. So that's going to be something I'm going to be watching as a Seahawks fan.
Well, Zach Taylor wanted to emphasize the run game with the Bengals this year, so we'll see if that matchup ends up bearing any fruit for the Bengals, and or if your concerns are validated or not. Brandan, we're going to get you out of here, but before we do, what is your prediction for this game, and or if you want to make any bold predictions or anything like that, you can call your shot here.
I'll go with a win for the Seahawks. They're starting out at home. It's a noisy place, to play anytime, but for the Bengals to have to come into Seattle Week 1 of the season with a new head coach, and I think that's going to be a tough ask for them. So I do think that the Bengals put up a decent amount of points against the Seahawks. I don't know when it's going to come. If it's going to come, early, it's going to kind of depend on that run game. But I'm going to say probably 27-17 for the Seahawks.
Okay, fair enough. Well, thanks, Brandan. I appreciate it again. Brandan Schulze from Field Goals. And Brandon, where can people follow you? And I know you have a podcast as well. So where can people find your content, follow you, all that good stuff?
Yeah, check us out, Field Goals at fieldgoals.com. And I also do another Seahawks podcast called the Seahawkers Podcast with a buddy of mine, Adam. And so follow us there at Seahawkers Pod on Twitter.
Okay, awesome. I may hit you up for some good spots to go this weekend. I'm coming up to the game, so
Nice. You come tailgate with us.
I may have to do that. I'm coming with my brother, so
Sweet.
I have to do that. Yeah.
All right, we'll see you there, man.
All right, thanks, man. Appreciate it. That was Brandan Schulze of Field Goals and the Field Goals podcast. It was awesome having him on. Very insightful as the Bengals are set to travel to Seattle for week 1 and take on the Seahawks. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. He's John Sheeran. I'm Anthony Cosenza. Get this show really wherever you listen to a podcast, from iTunes to Google Play to all kinds of different platforms. We are on them most likely, I would think. And we've got the YouTube thing back up and running, so we're stoked on that. We appreciate all the live listeners and all of you who download our show after the fact. John, let's close up shop here for a few minutes, kind of talking about some predictions. When we did our listener questions late last week, some of the ones we get that we just don't really have a lot of time to answer is in the season predictions. And I guess if we want to kind of be bold now, we can kind of talk about that now that the final roster is set, now that, we're into the regular season.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, among other predictions or bold predictions, if you want to go there, but among that, what's kind of your prediction for this team? Because I look at this week 1 game, to me, is a microcosm of the schedule for the Bengals, in that it could go really bad or they could really surprise us. And I don't know. I really don't know what they're going to give us this year.
Yeah, that's fair, because I don't expect them to win this game, and I don't expect them to win very much this season. But as I've said for most of the offseason, there's almost equal forces going back and forth between the Bengals are going to completely stink or the Bengals are going to be around the league average. And the reasons why they can stink is because they have a first-year head coach, an inexperienced coaching staff around him, a roster that's not that much more talented than it was last year, and by all means, an average quarterback. But on the other side, they won 6 games last year without half a season from their quarterback, wide receiver, best edge rusher, and 12 games from their best pass catching or tight end, who's their second best pass catcher. So there's a lot of positive regression that can definitely go their way, and that should go their way. They were 2-5 in close games last year. Teams who finished below 2 games under 500 in close games, more times than not, are almost always improved from an overall record standpoint. So from one end,
say that stat again. I like that one a lot. Will you say that one again?
Yes. They were 2-5 in close games last year. Close games are constituted as 8 points or less in terms of score differential. Teams who finished below 2 games 500 in close games, over 90%, almost 100% of the time in the past 10 to 12 years, improved from an overall record standpoint. So they were 6-10. They were 6-10 last year. By pure logic from this metric that has a bunch of information and data backing it, they should go at least 7-9 this year. Only problem is this is a really tough division. They're the 4th best team in this division pretty easily. And despite an easy schedule, they're just not that much more talented than they were last year. So the biggest factors here for them reaching that 7-9 baseline is that the players who have struggled in years past that have made this roster below average need to really step up and really need to be elevated by this new coaching staff. It's going to be the Zach Taylor difference. If he can utilize some underwhelming players from years past to really have them fulfill their potential this year, and for most players a really crucial year, they can do better than 7-9 maybe. Because at the end of the day, the Seahawks are one of the games that I just don't expect them to win at all. But besides that, there's only a couple more games where I would chalk up an easy L. Most of the games, 11, 12, 13 of these games on the schedule is very winnable for the Bengals. This is not a very hard schedule. And when they're healthy, they're decently talented, and they're not that much different than some of the other teams who are going to compete for a wild card or a division spot. So ultimately, again, there's positives and negatives on both sides of the fence here. They should regress health-wise. They should regress in close games. And when you all really add it up, I think 7-9 is about where you would fall with this team. Not necessarily worse than last year, but just not good enough to really compete yet.
Yeah, I have them right around that same range. I think 9 is the ceiling, and I think 7 is probably the floor. And unfortunately, I see the bulk of those wins coming at the end of the season. Maybe when AJ Green is back and starting to get healthier and maybe more well conditioned. These guys, the offensive line, build some cohesion. Zach Taylor and the inexperienced staff gets their feet under them. The players grasp the systems better, and then that's when you start seeing the momentum. If you remember when Marvin Lewis came in 2003, that's kind of what happened. I think the Bengals, at the time that they won, I don't have it directly in front of me, but at the time that they had that big Chiefs win, they were 4-5, 3-5, something like that, and then that got them into 5-5, and all of a sudden they rattled off another couple of wins, and then they were knocking on the door of the playoffs in the first season there. So I could see a similar type of scenario playing out this year where, it's a little bit of a sluggish start, maybe some ugly losses early on where you're going, oh boy, you start to question. I remember the questions of, is Marvin Lewis the guy in 2003? And then all of a sudden he was the savior, a few years later. So I could see some of those questions early in the season going, oh boy, this is looking awful, blah, blah, blah. But I think what I see occurring is a streak of positive momentum towards the end of the season, especially maybe you get a Jonah Williams back and then, things get better in the offensive line there. We don't know. But I think that's kind of how I see some things playing out with this year. Maybe 7 to 9 wins, 9 being probably the ceiling. I don't know if that gets you a wild card or anything like that. But I think I'm kind of in the same. I find it hard to place them with fewer wins this year than last year for those two or three great stats you threw out. I think that even though there's inexperience in the coaching, I think there's going to be an uptick in the coaching, particularly on offense. It's hard for them to get any worse on defense than they were last year. So for me, I find it difficult to believe that you see people out there throwing 3 wins out there. It's possible, but I just
very possible, but not likely.
Yeah, I mean it's possible, but I don't really buy into that based on what we saw last year. Some things that we've seen this year. I'd feel a lot better about this team right now if both AJ Green and Jonah Williams were healthy.
Absolutely.
I would feel a lot better, and it's crazy to say that because a lot of times on a team, you miss 2 players, it shouldn't make that huge of an impact, but it does. I mean, missing those 2 guys definitely has a big impact. Any other kind of predictions or, I don't know, bold things you want to put out there, either for week 1, and then I'll get your prediction on the score for this week too. But I don't know, bold predictions on, you think, players' performances or the coaches or the team or something in week 1, that sort of thing.
You kind of alluded to this in your explanation like a few minutes back, but by the end of September, we will see multiple fire Zach Taylor tweets or comments.
Wow.
They're probably they're not spoiling my prediction. They're probably not going to win this week. They might split between Buffalo and San Francisco, and then they play with Pittsburgh in week 4. And pretty much all those games are going to be without AJ Green. And we've seen Andy Dalton without AJ Green. It's not very pretty. And it's going to be interesting to see how that offense really overcomes the loss of him. And it's really going to be a testament to see, what Zach Taylor's pseudo Rams style system of offense really is made of without your critical piece. Because like you said, it's not normal for a wide receiver to have more of an impact than your quarterback. But I think BetOnline released a graphic just today about ranking quarterbacks by how much they affect the point spread. Andy Dalton was 30th or whatever in affecting it by 0 points. And Russell Wilson was top 3 and -8 or 9 or whatever. So that's just the dynamic of what the Bengals have been in the AJ Green era and how much he has impacted. So they're going to struggle early on. I think they may not go 0-4 necessarily, but I don't see them being much better than 1-3 or 2-2. And there's going to be some doubt kind of creeping in from the fan base. Is Zach Taylor going to really right the ship? Because there are some fans who expect this team to compete, and I think that's a little bit unreasonable at this stage of where the team is. But I think they're going to rely a lot on Joe Mixon and Giovanni Bernard, both in getting them involved in both phases of the game. They're going to try to rotate Tyler Eifert as much as they can with CJ Uzomah at tight end, and they're going to lean in on having John Ross being more involved in the offense, not just as a vertical decoy, but as a guy who can take catches, after the catch and really pick up some easy yardage in that point. So I expect some growing pains with the Zach Taylor offense, but I also expect to see a big picture of what they can do without their best star on the field.
I will say that I think you're going to see an uptick, quite a bit of uptick from some players, particularly on offense, that have been, you kind of wondered, why aren't they being used? Why aren't they getting playing time? All that kind of stuff. I think Taylor is the type of guy to mine some of that production that Marvin Lewis, Ken Zampese, Bill Lazor, a slew of others could not do. Now, I don't want to give him a ton of credit, but Hugh Jackson, as an offensive coordinator with the Bengals, granted they had a lot of talent, he was able to use a lot of people and a lot of schemes, and he was pretty creative, and that offense in 2015 was very fun. I think that, again, maybe not right away, but I think as the year progresses, Taylor gets comfortable, Callahan gets comfortable, you're going to see some different dynamics of this offense where you go, oh, there's Bernard. Oh, there's CJ Uzama. Oh, there's Drew Sample. Oh, these guys that, there's going to be a lot of pass distribution. There's going to be a lot of guys involved. And that's what I'm excited to see, because I do think this team has talent in a lot of different spots. It's more about the improper utilization of those talent, of that talent. So, from that standpoint, that's kind of where I'm at with some predictions. Speaking of predictions, we're going to get out of here in a minute, but your prediction, John, for this game coming up this week, am I going to be crying in my clam chowder, or what's going on?
I don't think you should be crying, because I think you should have a good idea of what to expect. It's definitely hard to predict how they do against a team that they don't play very often, against a team that has changed a lot since the last time that we've seen them, and a team that is still going to compete in the tougher conference in the NFC. So I think the Seahawks are going to put up somewhere in the mid-20s, maybe like 27 or 26 points. Russell Wilson will have a pretty good day. It's just going to be how the Bengals offensive line deals with Clowney and the rest of the guys up there. That's just a variable that I don't think that they were expecting. None of us were really expecting that trade to happen. I think most of us thought he was going to go to Miami, but I guess Miami's really dropping the ball or just tanking on purpose for a quarterback to really have drawn him away. So I think somewhere in the line of like 27 to 13 is about right. And I think that the Bengals can score against the Seattle defense, because that secondary can be exposed. It's just a matter of how much Clowney can impact the passing game, and whether or not that they can't do the things that they want to do early on, and that the game script kind of gets all out of whack. And at the same time, how the defense is going to stop one of the best and most creative quarterbacks in the NFL on the road in one of the most hostile environments. It's just a tough task for Zach Taylor, and it's not one I expect him to accomplish. And going into it, that's fine. It's just now that they have to eat pretty early in the season.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts about the Clowney thing. I mean, you got to give the Seahawks credit, because they've been competitive. They made the playoffs last year. They lost some guys, and they put the chips in the table, and they got a great deal for him. But I mean, they went out and got a premier guy on defense, and that is what teams do who feel that when they feel that they are close to a championship, they go and they get valuable players. They make trades. They take risks, if you will, on some of these guys to better their team, even if it's temporarily. And the Bengals have been selling us this idea all offseason that really it's the coaching change that's going to make the difference, and that they should be a playoff team this year, yet they didn't really make any big moves, especially in the wake of injuries to AJ Green, Jonah Williams, that sort of thing. So, to me, that just shows a little bit of disparity in terms of organizational motivation, or whatever you want to call it. But for this game, as much as I would like to say they're going to win because I'm there, from what I understand, that's a tough place to play. I
would bring some earplugs.
Yeah, I have heard it is deafening there. So I'm very curious to see what that's like. But I don't think they'll score only 13 points. I mean, I think they'll probably get upwards of 20, but I think it's probably going to be like a 30-20 game. Maybe it's close in the third quarter-ish, early fourth quarter, and then the Seahawks get a late score and kind of pull away a little bit. That's kind of how I see it. Unfortunately, I would love By the way, if anyone's wondering, the games I travel to with the Bengals, they don't have the greatest win-loss record in the games that I traveled to. I was kind of trying to do a little tally of recent games, basically since 2003 that I can think of, and not great. So I wish I could say I was a good luck charm, but I am not, sadly. But I think it'll be a competitive game. I think people will be surprised by that. I don't know that the Bengals will come out victorious. I think it's going to take a couple of monstrous plays for them to do that, a la what they did last year in week 1 against Indianapolis. We're going to get out of here. Before we do, there's a couple of comments here that I wanted to get to in our live YouTube chat. Brian McHugh, man, sad boy indeed. That's to you. 40 Ollie says, I see 10 wins just as easy as 10 losses. That's kind of where I think a lot of people are. Coaching and defense are the variables. A lot of people are bashing Zampese. I guess I shouldn't have mentioned that name, I guess.
When did you mention Zampese?
When I was talking about the fact that the Bengals coaches were not mining the talent, mining the production out of the talent they had. I know. See, you get Ken Zampese talk on our show. That's what you get. So a couple of, I agree, Anthony, with Green and Williams. They're different teams. Says AJ Green for president. You think he likes AJ Green? I do. So yeah, a lot of differing opinions here with the Cincinnati Bengals and their outlook going forward. John, enjoy the game this weekend, man.
Enjoy, man. You're going to be there, and if you're going to travel to any game and you don't have a good track record, you might as well make it one where you're 9.5 point underdogs.
Well, so here's the thing, just quickly. I was set when I saw like who the Bengals opponents were and where they were playing them. I was set to go to the Rams game because it was going to be in LA. And of course, the NFL did the old pull the rug out from under me and put that game of all games in London. So that game, not only will it not be a more watchable time for me at 1 p.m., I won't be able to go. Sorry to our friends Bengals UK and others across the pond. I just I can't swing that price tag quite yet. So anyway, I was set to go to that game. I thought that would have been a very interesting game to go to. We'll see how that ends up. But I had to try and go to another game, and this one kind of came into place last minute. So that's how that works. Anyway, enjoy the game this weekend. Football's back, week 1. I think a lot of us are very excited, but at the same time, tempering expectations a little bit. So I don't know. But enjoy the game however you watch it, however you, keep up with the updates. Keep it to cincyjungle.com. We've got all the news, opinions, analysis, breaking news, injury news, all that stuff is on there. John Sheeran is one of the valuable contributors on that site. And, of course, our podcast brings you all the insight. Special guests like Brandan Schulze, thanks to him from Field Goals of SB Nation. We appreciate his time. So, get this show how you can: iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, Megaphone, YouTube, Cincy Jungle, all that good stuff. Appreciate you tuning in live. Appreciate you sticking with us with the live broadcast despite some of the issues over the past couple of weeks. And hopefully the Bengals we're talking about a 1-0 start next week, John.
Yeah, and I'm prepared to take very many L's this weekend. The UC plays Ohio State. Bengals play the Seahawks. I'm prepared for the worst, but if the best happens, I will be happy boy John next week.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Well, we have a small little bet there. So yeah, enjoy the game, everybody. Just so you know too, I usually do a post-game video, usually through Cincy Jungle's Facebook. We may even do it through this platform, but I don't know if I'll be able to do that Sunday afternoon, just the chaos getting out of a stadium and all that kind of stuff. What I may do is do it Monday afternoon or evening at this point, unless John wants to volunteer and do it through the Facebook page. I don't want to volunteer for him. Voluntold him, but
that might just be something I do.
Okay. If you don't, then maybe I'll do it Monday. We'll figure that out, but we'll get you something. It depends on when. We appreciate it. But thanks, everyone. We've gone long. Enjoy your weekend. John, I'll see you, buddy.
I'll see you, man.